Okay, we are back working on this Johnson 6 horsepower outboard. In my first video on this engine here, I did a compression test. I've linked that video right up here. If you want to go see the compression test, take a look at that. Today, we're going to check for spark and then see how far we can get in that process. So, without further ado, let's get back into this thing. Whenever I checked for compression, there was a lot of people who have very different opinions about that. I talked to somebody who is very knowledgeable about these engines, Brandon from Brandon's Garage. I'll link his channel up here. And he said 70 PSI, 60 PSI is fine. These things will run like that. These old two-stroke Johnson Evinrude motors did not have a lot of compression. You probably noticed I just moved this. That's because I got ahead of myself a little bit with this project. We're doing a spark test right now, but I've also taken the lower leg off of this so that I could do the impeller. I'll cover that later on. Right now, we're just checking on spark. I played around and used my spark tester. And you may have caught a short that I did. I don't remember where I posted it, but I did a short where I did a spark test on this. And I only got spark from the lower spark plug. And that was using this, honestly, quite awful spark tester. And why I think it's awful is because this spark tester is supposed to work in line. So the idea for how this dumb thing works is that you stick this in this boot, and then you clip this to a ground, and you should see a spark jump here. However, this piece flops around a lot, so I never can get a good accurate gap. I'm always just sort of guessing at the gap. And so some people say you should be able to get much more of a gap here than you can with a spark plug, and that tells you how good your spark is. But I always have problems keeping this from slopping around. I don't know if this thing is just missing parts or what. But also, with these old spark plug boots, this doesn't fit in here tightly. It just falls out because the end of these spark plugs is bigger than the head on this. I'm not going to rely on this today. We're chucking this aside. We're going to do our spark test the old-fashioned way. We're loosen the plug, have it snugly in its boot, and then we're going to touch it to a ground. Now, I'm by myself. I can't hold this on a ground and pull the cord at the same time, and I'm also afraid of getting shocked because I'm an innie. So what I'm going to do is use a pair of these. These are actually real vice grip ones. And I'm going to clamp my spark plugs to here and test them. And we'll see if we get a spark. But before we go to do a spark test, I wanted to show you something with these spark plugs that I think is really fascinating. When I did my first look over of this engine and was doing the compression test, I didn't pay much attention to these plugs. I just looked to see if they looked clean. But what I noticed is that these plugs are probably the original plugs from 1969 when this engine was built. These are Champion J4J spark plugs. Now, from what I could tell, they haven't made Champion J4J spark plugs in a lot of years. And on top of that, these ones have green paint around the base. That green paint is the same green paint as this engine. And I can see red primer in this spot right here where the spark plug was in when the engine was painted. So my thought is, when they were building this engine in 1969, they were putting these plugs in there, they tightened them down, and then they sprayed this engine. Now somebody told me, they said, oh, that's a trick that rebuilders do to make it seem original. I told you I paid a little over $200 for this engine. Who would go out and hunt down vintage Champion J4J spark plugs, clean up this engine as good as it was cleaned up, to repaint it with the plugs in to try to fool somebody? I mean, if I was paying $1,000 for this engine and the cowl was in mint condition, Maybe that could have been the case, but I don't think so. All right, let's get on with this spark test. So I've got this slowed down to slow-mo, and here's me pulling for a spark for the top cylinder. I'm pulling a couple of times and I'm not getting a spark. And here we are now testing for spark with the bottom spark plug. Once again, we're running this in slow-mo. Hey, we've got a spark right there. All right, so now we're testing the bottom spark plug that we know is good, and the top wire. Running this in slow-mo. And we can see that that's not working either. What we've determined here is that we don't have spark in the top, and it's not the plug. So now we got to do what I didn't want to do, which was get the flywheel off. I got to use my impact gun because the flywheel wants to turn instead of pulling the nut off. So I usually use my impact gun to do that. And you have to be real careful with doing these because you can damage parts by prying on things and turning the engine the wrong way and using too much force. I'm old school. I have an air impact gun. Hey, all right. All right, let me show you what we're looking at here with this flywheel. So this is the nut that I just took off. And then there's this metal plate. There we go. And under the metal plate are these 3 holes here. And in these 3 holes is where you put in a puller to be able to pull this flywheel off. Because as you can see, it's keyed. You can see a keyway right there. And this is a tapered shaft. So what you don't want to do is hammer on this to take it off. This is a puller. I don't know what kind of puller this is. It might be for something much bigger than this. So the idea is that there's a threaded bolt for the puller that goes down through the middle, and that's what pushes on that. And then you thread things through here onto this, and as this is getting threaded down, that pulls this up, which is what lifts your flywheel. So the way you do this is you set your puller on here. And this one needs a puller that has 3 points. So we're going to be using this one, and this one, not this one. This is like a universal puller. And also, we want to make sure we're doing is we're using bolts that thread in these correctly. Now we don't want to thread all the way through these until we reach the end of the world. We just want something to thread in here. So what I've done is I've rigged up some stainless steel bolts from some other boat project with a small appropriate sized washer and then a big old junky washer that will allow it to work in here. So it'll not bend up my small washer. So we set this on here and then we thread these in. Big washer, then small washer. I'm going to thread them in by hand a ways. There we go. There we go. And there we go. Now we don't have to be too scientific with all of this. The idea is that you want this just to be able to hold on to here like this. So that way the main part can be threaded down in and do its thing. My main one has a point on it and it also has this cap. And the way I've typically used this is I thread this through and then I set the cap on there because the cap fits in the center hole pretty nice and protects everything else from getting messed up, I think. I don't know. Now usually what I've found with these things is that once you get them kind of snug, they just sort of pop. Sometimes this stuff is kind of awkward. So I don't want it smacking me in the face. drop a bit of penetrant in here, huh? Can't hurt. That does not want to give. Now we can just see these all just come out by hand because all the pressure is off of this. Oh, look how great this thing looks on the inside. Looks like new. All right, so with the flywheel off now, you get a close-up look of what we got going on inside of here. And this stuff looks great. I don't know, are these original? Purple? They're not all cracked up. Has somebody been working on this engine, or is all of this just super minty? The next thing I want to do is we're going to clean up the points to make sure that all of the points are good. The first thing I'm going to do is we're going to see how these points over here look. Right, we can't do that anymore. And I haven't got the lower unit on there either. So I'll have to turn this from up here. These are open, closed. So I don't know if you can see this or not. See that black line? That's how dirty those points were. And that's the good one. And this is just with a piece of paper. See in the black line on the sandpaper? So. All right, so we've sanded the points. Now I'm just going to check to make sure the gap is okay. And these are supposed to be set at 20. This one's open. And it's dead on. And this one's dead on. So we're good there. All right, so now that we've cleaned our points and all of this looks visually good, maybe we have what it takes to be able to do another spark check. Because maybe all this needed was the points needed to be cleaned up. Well, there we go. So we still don't have any spark in our number 1 cylinder. I don't know if I lost spark in the number 2 cylinder, but obviously now we know we need to throw some parts at this. So I'm going to go look some things up, probably get a points kit. I don't want to buy everything if I don't need everything. But we do need to have spark on our number 1. So we're going to go spend some money now. That's it for this little old Johnson 6-horse power for today. So we've got compression, we got spark on 1 cylinder, and stuff looks good under here, and we got our flywheel off if we need to pop it off again. So we're making progress, just not as fast as I'd like to be making progress. Anyway, check out this video right here. Watch that one next. Thanks so much for watching.